Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Selective College Admissions. Stand out and get in. I'm Judi Robinovitz, Certified Educational Planner, and I've been doing college counseling for, well, let me just say more than 30 years right now, and it is certainly my passion. And let me just give you a little bit of information before we begin. First of all, you can be watching us either through Facebook Live or YouTube Live. If you have trouble with one of them, you can always switch to the other. And we're also recording it, and the recording will be made available, I'm sure, by tomorrow. And there are a number of downloads that are available for this webinar. You can download them at any time. You don't have to do it right now. But if you go to the scorewebinars.com page and you look for this webinar, which should be probably the first one that comes up, just below the webinar's description will be links basically to download 6 different documents, flyers that will reinforce everything that I'll be telling you tonight. And the very first one, that's called What Colleges Look For in High School Students, is an infographic that we created that does, I'd say, mirror almost all of this evening's presentations. And also the second download not only has all of the admission statistics for this year for the 12 state universities in Florida, but it does have with that also an SAT and ACT, all the dates for this year, as well as workshop schedule. And then a number of other, I'd say supplemental materials that can also be very germane to selective college admission. So with that, I'd like to get into the 10 most important factors that colleges use to select their class, how they make admission decisions. And I'd say for many colleges, this is the order in which those 10 most important things fall. For other colleges, there may be some very slight differences. And I plan to emphasize as I talk about each of these 10 elements, what makes it, a student really stand out, a student who is applying to a very selective university. And I'm also going to give you a surprise 11th one. Lots of additional information came out very recently about one more factor that colleges use in admission that most people don't know exists. And it was really just made public very recently. So I'll be going into that as well. And a lot of what I will tell you tonight, I will amend to some extent to talk about how COVID-19 has also impacted that particular element of the admission consideration. So let's start with the most important factor, and it's really 2 factors. It's a student's academic record. So it's a granular, and this year an even more granular evaluation of a student's transcript, where colleges are looking course by course, beginning with the high school courses that a student took as early as middle school, and giving more and more attention to the classes taken in each successive year, as well as the courses that are listed on the application that will be, a senior schedule. So they're looking at the individual courses, the rigor of the curriculum, the actual grade, the progression. Did a student go from regular to honors to AP? Did the student downgrade from honors to regular or from AP to honors? They're very much looking at trends. Have the grades remained consistently, at the same level all the way through? Have they gone up? Was there, a bump somewhere up or down? They're going to be looking, just nitty gritty. So let me say that it is far more than the GPA. The GPA is not the most important thing. It's actually the rigor of the courses. And the more selective the university, the more rigorous the high school curriculum has to be. And just to give you an example, at Florida State University, which is definitely selective. It's not the most highly selective, but it's definitely, one of our 2 most selective state universities here in Florida. But the average admitted student last year who came from a school that offered a full range of AP courses had on average 9 APs. So you can take from that, you can extrapolate from there and say, great, if I'm if I'm applying to a college that is much more, selective in admission, a college that has a 20% admit rate, a 15% admit rate, a 5% admit rate, that's telling you that you really do need to have the most rigorous courses that are available to you. And in some cases, perhaps even going outside of your school's curriculum, going to online resources, perhaps FLVS, in order to even strengthen the curriculum further. But at a bare minimum, it's 5 core academic courses every single semester. Typically, those courses are English, math, science, social science, English, math, science, social science, foreign language. And I'm going to say there's one more core now, pretty much computer science, which doesn't fit into any of those categories. And while many students will have 3 to 4 years of the same foreign language when they're applying to a highly selective university, there are also students who are not enjoying a foreign language and will want to drop it earlier on. And the answer is yes, that's really fine, but you have to replace it with a really rigorous academic subject in one of the other core areas. So it may mean if I've dropped Spanish after having, say, Spanish 1 in middle school, Spanish 2 and 3 my first 2 years in high school, and I'm done with Spanish in my opinion, I need to be able to do things like pick up AP statistics or AP computer science, and there's 2 different years of AP computer science. Or perhaps I need to double up in my science courses and take both biology and chemistry the same year in order to be able to graduate high school by having AP Bio and AP Chem and at least 1 year of AP Physics. Or if I'm applying to a very highly selective program in engineering or computer science or anything, tech-wise, that I'm having both years of AP calculus. And that's, of course, assuming that my high school offers it. But if it doesn't, it means that perhaps I'm looking for another way to take that kind of a course. It begins as early as middle school, taking the strong enough courses so that when a student gets into high school, freshman year can be filled with honors courses, perhaps even something like AP Human Geography, which is given by many high schools as early as freshman year. But you're setting the stage early enough to be able to comfortably add AP, IB, and ACE and dual enrollment. I'm going to say sort of yes and no. If you're looking at the state universities in Florida, AP, IB, ACE, dual enrollment are treated exactly the same for purposes of calculating a GPA. But if you're looking at much more selective universities, whether public or private, the AP and IB are going to carry the most amount of weight. Dual enrollment will carry a lot of weight if it is a higher level course. In other words, if it's a math course, let's say, that's higher than calculus. So if it's something like differential equations or linear algebra, or perhaps it's abnormal psychology, so something that's higher than AP Psych. But a dual enrollment lower level course like, let's say, ENC 1101, which is a freshman English class at state universities here in Florida, is really not a good substitute at all for, let's say, AP or IB English, Lit, Lang, it doesn't matter. But unless, of course, the AP or IB did not fit into a schedule. And the ACE courses are not as universally accepted outside of the state of Florida as they are here. Don't misinterpret. Yes, there are plenty of colleges that will look at an ACE as relatively equivalent to an AP or an IB. But if you're applying, for example, to any school in the University of California system, like UCLA or Berkeley or San Diego, they don't count ACE. You're not going to get any extra points for being in ACE courses. When I visited University of Southern California last year, and I asked admissions specifically, how do you evaluate ACE courses when you're looking at a student's transcript? The admission officer with whom I was speaking, who was relatively high up, basically said to me, "What's ACE?" And my response was, "Hey, thanks for answering the question." So I think sticking to AP and IB as much as possible, honors, IB middle year program, used to be called pre-IB. These are the courses that the more selective colleges are looking for. But I will also say that it's more important to have a happy, healthy, well-adjusted child, and not kill yourself to get into a school that is so uber selective. If taking extra AP courses is going to cause, anxiety, depression, loss of quality of life, it does not pay to overload on the AP and IB types of courses. That you should take whatever you feel really comfortable with, but just know that there are trade-offs. Selective college admission really put tremendous emphasis on rigor of curriculum. So many colleges actually recalculate the GPA, and I'd like to give you an idea of how that's done. They're going to start by including only the core courses, which basically means that you're going to eliminate things like PE, art, unless perhaps it's AP art history, and some schools may count AP studio art as well, but you're going to be eliminating things like journalism, theater, music appreciation, shop. So it's really just your core academic subjects. And I'd say for now, I would include the AP, IB, ACE, and dual enrollment. There may be some cases where you're going to pull out some of those courses, but by including all the core courses and converting from A to F to the 4.0 scale, we're going to be able to do a numeric calculation. If you go to a school that gives pluses and minuses, you're going to be adding a third for the plus and subtracting a third for the minus for each one. And by the way, you're always doing this consistently, either always using year-end grades or always using semester grades. If you are tuning in from Broward and go to a Broward public high school where only pluses are given, no minuses, you would add a half a point for the plus because there's nothing to subtract for a minus. And essentially, you're going to then just add up all of those points. Let's say the 4s and 3s. Hopefully, there's not too many lower numbers, little fractions for pluses and minuses. And then you're going to divide by the number of courses that you actually added up. And what that winds up giving you is a core unweighted GPA. And that is a GPA that I'd say is used by most selective colleges, at least the ones that are recalculating a GPA. Some colleges will take that GPA directly off the transcript, and others actually don't even calculate a GPA. They just give you a rating. And in fact, I was reading something today about colleges that give a rating in like an academic rating from 1 to 5, an extracurricular rating from 1 to 5. Similarly, for a recommendation rating, an intellectual curiosity rating, and it's those rating scores that really determine a student's admissibility. So just know there may or may not be a GPA calculation, but you still want to have an idea of what your core unweighted GPA is. Okay, I'm going to stop because there was a question that came in.
If your high school does not offer many AP classes, more ACE than anything, is there a place to explain this on the application?
Okay. So the question is, what if you go to a high school that doesn't really offer a lot of AP, but only, but offers, focuses on ACE, which is definitely the case for some of our public high schools. So certainly, it's something that your guidance counselor can indicate in the letter of recommendation. Also, almost every transcript that is sent to a college is accompanied by a school profile. Every high school has a profile. That profile will indicate how many AP courses are offered, how many ACE courses were offered. So it will be clear in there that the school is ACE heavy as opposed to AP heavy. But still bear in mind that if you're applying to a University of California system school, they're not going to give you extra weight for the ACE. They just don't, because they only give it to what's called a California approved honors course. And that means it's either an AP or an IB course. And if you're out of state, none of our honors courses are approved by the state of California, and our ACE courses and dual enrollment courses are not either. But the other thing that you can do is that if you really, and AP is I would say that many people will consider AP to be a little bit more rigorous than ACE, that if you're, let's say your high school only gives ACE Chem and doesn't give AP Chem, you might consider taking AP Chem through an accredited online resource, or any other AP course can be taken that way. Okay. One more question, and then I'll go on to a weighted GPA.
Not necessarily a question, but so wrote in that to clarify, if you're applying to Florida schools, dual enrollment English 1101 is going to be looked at the same as AP language. But you mentioned the converse for selective non-Florida.
Okay. So the question comes, what if you're applying to one of our 12 state universities and you're taking ENC 1101 instead of AP English? So first of all, it will be counted exactly the same way. The weighting will be 100% the same. So you'll get 1 bonus point for an AP, IB, ACE, or dual enrollment when you're applying to a state university in Florida. They are treated the same way. However, there are some nuances of difference that I'll get into, in a moment. But specifically from the University of Florida, they also said that they are going to scrutinize the transcript to see specifically like which dual enrollment courses were taken, which AP, which ACE courses, were taken, and that they value qualitatively, not quantitatively, not in the calculation, but they value qualitatively those that are considered more rigorous. So I think AP and IB Lang Lit would be considered more rigorous than ENC 1101 and 1102. However, if those fit better into your schedule, take them. And again, in terms of the actual calculation that our state universities are using, they are going to treat the AP, IB, ACE, and dual enrollment the same, but I'm going to get to another screen that talks about a few nuances. So in terms of calculating a weighted GPA, because the first GPA I showed you gave you no extra credit for, all your AP or IB or honors courses, so you could have a 3.9, and so that's basically 90% A's and 10% B's, which you had to work really, really hard for if you have a rigorous curriculum. But what about the student who didn't take any honors or AP courses? She could also have a 3.9, might not have worked nearly as hard because she didn't have honors, AP, IB types of courses. They're both a 3.9. So for colleges that use an unweighted GPA, they are going to separately evaluate the rigor of your curriculum. They're going to be counting how many AP or, let's just say advanced courses you took relative to how many advanced courses were available. Did you take 40% of them, 80% of them? What did you actually take? The other thing that most people don't know about is that as part of Common App, almost every college on Common App, and there's roughly 900 universities that use the Common App, they have something called a school report, where your counselor or whoever it is that is doing your school report is being asked to rate you in certain areas, rate you relative to the other kids in your graduating class. So one of the things that you are going to be rated on is the rigor of your schedule. And it's almost like a Likert scale. There's 5 different, I believe it's 5 rating categories, from something that is the most rigorous, more rigorous than like anyone else at the school, all the way down to saying, the least rigorous it could be. And so you're rated on your academics, your extracurriculars, I think your character, and I think there's also one that's like overall. So if a college is trying to figure out like how rigorous your curriculum is, not only are they going to do their own calculation of it or evaluation of it, they're also going to look to see how your counselor rated you. And if you're trying to get into one of our nation's very most selective universities, they are looking for you to get the very top rating as like, this is one of the few best I've ever seen in my career. Possibly the next one down, which is something like, I don't know, top 5% or might be top 10%. If you email me later, I can go and look it up. But this is something on a mid-year report. Students don't get to see the mid-year report. I've actually seen them because I have filled them out before, because I'm the founding owner of SCORE Academy, which are private schools in South Florida. But anyway, you're going to add weight for any of these more advanced courses, a half a point for something that's an honors or an IB middle year programs course, and AP, IB, ACE, and dual enrollment get 1 point. And I know some of you were sitting there and saying, wait a minute, what happened to 6 points? I got an A in my AP bio. I got 4 points for the A and I got 2 points for the AP. That's 6 points. Well, the colleges don't do it that way. They basically give you 1 point, at least our state universities here in Florida and most other states that do a weighted will give you just 1 point, regardless of the grade you got, as long as it was a C- or better. So 1 point for AP, IB, ACE, and dual enrollment. And then so after you've added the weights, you're then going to divide by the number of core courses as you did before, and that will give you a core weighted GPA, and that's what's used by many state universities, including Florida's. But I did say that there were some nuanced differences in the GPA calculation of our state universities. They're not exactly the same. So believe it or not, UCF is a little tougher on you than UF and FSU. So UF and FSU will use every single AP, IB, and ACE course you have, including something like, let's say, ACE Travel and Tourism. However, UCF only used what are called approved courses. And those approved courses are actually in pretty much in what's called the Future Education Handbook. It's strictly for the state of Florida. It comes out every year. You may want to take a picture of this screen because on pages 63 to 69 this year, they show you what the approved courses are. So UCF is going to be knocking out a few of the AP, IB, or ACE courses that are not approved. And then in terms of dual enrollment, there, again, in that same handbook, it shows all the dual enrollment courses that are approved. And so there may be dual enrollment courses that you're taking that are not on the approved list. They're approved for you to take in high school, but they're not approved in terms of calculating a GPA for admission to one of our state universities. And there's one other booklet that's listed down here on your screen that has some additional courses listed in it that can be approved. So if you're going to be taking a dual enrollment course, you should be looking at this Future Education Handbook to make sure that what you're taking is something that's considered approved if you're looking at one of our state universities. And I've just written up the 3 that are the most competitive, to get into so that you can understand the slight differences in the GPA calculation. And for those of you that really would like to recalculate your GPA but saying, wait a minute, this is really too complicated, on our website, there is a GPA calculation, a calculator, so that you can actually enter in, answer the questions about the number of A's and B's and C's, etc., and it will recalculate an unweighted and a weighted GPA for you. So it's just recalculatemygpa.com, and it is part of the Score at the Top website. In the face of COVID-19, because so many colleges have gone test optional, I think it's more than 2/3 of all the universities in this country now are test optional for this year. So if you have a younger child, test optional is not nearly as likely to apply. But what colleges have said is that everything else that we would consider, we're going to go into a deeper, finer evaluation of it. And so specifically when I was talking to Hega Ferguson, who is the director of admission at FSU the other day, she very much said we are going to look at curriculum even more than we did before. And we've always looked at it a lot, and now we're going to be looking at it even more. So yes, it's true that so many colleges have gone test optional, but having a solid score on the SAT or ACT can still be a determining factor for you. So I do want to make sure that you understand what test optional means, because it doesn't mean test blind. If a school is test blind, it basically means they are not looking at your score. You send it, they're tearing it up. There was recently a lawsuit against the state university system in California, filed on behalf of some students with learning disabilities who could not get accommodations because of COVID-19 and not being able to take a test, let's say, in person in their school. And so for this year, the entire University of California system has been mandated to go test blind. I believe they are fighting it, but it may be too late to make a difference. So test optional basically means that they are going to de-emphasize the use of an SAT score or ACT score when making a decision. However, those test scores are still going to play a major role in admission. And by the way, they will also play a role in things like scholarships and honors programs and even selective majors. And what we anticipate happening this year is that it's going to be more competitive to get into colleges. And that's because if a student does not have to submit her test scores, she might be more tempted to apply to a school that is more commensurate with her academic record. According to research, roughly 2/3 of students have test scores that completely reflect their academics. But 1/3 of students have test scores that are either considerably higher or considerably lower than their grades. So what is going to happen is that some of these kids who would normally have lower scores are going to be applying to more competitive schools because they feel that their academic record and other factors are even stronger. So many of us are predicting an uptick in the number of students who apply. And because colleges didn't create any extra beds for these students, it's going to be harder to get in. And also, if a student does not have test scores, not only will there be more emphasis on the student's academic record, but there will be other things that the colleges are looking for more and more in extracurricular commitment, in their writing, in their essays, in their recommendations from teachers, and I will go into those in a little bit more detail. But it is truly up to the student to decide whether to submit scores or not, and a student does not have to do the same thing for every college. So, there'll be some colleges that you may submit scores to and others that you decide not to submit scores to. But research that was done just a few years ago, based on several thousand kids applying to test optional colleges, some of which were very selective and private, others were less selective. All of the research showed that the non-submitters, the students who did not submit scores, were admitted at a lower rate than the students who did submit scores. And in fact, recently found out that the University of Chicago, which is before COVID-19, the most selective university in America to have gone test optional, roughly only 15 to 20% of students apply there without test scores. But they're also accepted in much, much, much lower numbers than the other 80 to 85% who do submit test scores. So it is something to keep in mind. And another question has come in.
Should I use the school's 75th percentile as a rule for whether or not to send my SATs?
Okay. So, I'm going to answer that question in 1 minute. So let me just finish this one little part and then I'll answer that great question. So first of all, for a completely up-to-date list of all the test optional colleges, if you go to fairtest.org, you'll see a menu item about colleges and SAT, ACT, requirements. If you click on that, you will get the complete up-to-date list of colleges that are test optional, test blind, and there are even some that are test flexible. So the question is really, should I use a school's 75% mark in terms of making a decision for submitting scores or not? So I think what the question really boils down to is almost every college publishes a mid 50% SAT and ACT range, basically saying that the middle 50% of students who we accepted fell into this particular range. So if you have what I'll call a competitive score, I would definitely submit it. So in the beginning of COVID-19, I was thinking, or I should say maybe in the beginning of more schools going test optional, I was beginning to think about, okay, if you were at or above the average, in other words, let's say roughly the midpoint of that mid 50%, not the 75% mark, closer to the top, but somewhere in the middle of the range. If you were at or above the middle of the range, my thoughts were absolutely submit the scores. With so many test centers having been canceled, especially in South Florida, I'm thinking that I would go down perhaps a little bit below even the midpoint, so that if a school's mid 50% is, let's say, 1,200 to 1,400, My original thoughts were, if you have a 1300 or better, please submit it. I'm actually thinking now that if you have even a 1250, something close to the midpoint, submit it. And that's because we're also expecting that average SAT scores for colleges in terms of admitted students are likely to be just a little bit lower this year, specifically because students have had fewer testing opportunities. I know that my students from, let's say, Miami and Broward counties have actually gone up to Martin and St. Lucie and Indian River counties to take SAT and ACT, but that is certainly not an option for all students. So I would say that if you feel that your scores are anywhere near the average scores of a university's admitted students, definitely submit them to that university. Also, if you are applying to a very highly selective major, and the most highly selective one today is computer science, having a high SAT score is really going to help, or ACT score. If you're applying to a dual degree program in medicine, they're typically called BSMD programs, and there are perhaps 40 to 50 of them. Many of them are still requiring an SAT or ACT score, even if the university went test optional. Although one of them, Northwestern University, actually is not doing a BSMD program this year. And I suppose they feel that it might be unfair because some really great students, many really great students, may not have had the opportunity to take or retake an SAT or an ACT. You'll find that some scholarships and honors programs may still require an SAT or an ACT score, or at least make more use of it, even if the college went test optional. And if anyone is listening who has a homeschooled students, I believe, still need to submit SAT or ACT scores, even to a college that is test optional. And a recent change is that an NCAA Division I or Division II athlete no longer needs to submit a score for eligibility. Eligibility will be based exclusively on academic record, on GPA and credits, but not on test scores for minimum eligibility. You may be wondering about the state university system in Florida. So far, they are holding out and they are not test optional. It is not up to the individual state universities to make a decision about test optional. It's actually up to what's called the Florida Board of Governors. And currently their feeling is that there are enough additional testing opportunities between now and December for a student to be able to take or retake an SAT or an ACT. So they're currently not planning to revisit that question until December at the earliest. But understand, with COVID-19, everything is fluid, and so there could be a change in that. And I did specifically ask a couple of the admission directors, what happens if you get an application from a student with a phenomenal academic record, great extracurriculars, but no test scores? And the answer was, we have to reject the student. They must have test scores unless the Board of Governors makes a change. So I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but if you are thinking seriously about any of our state universities in Florida, it's very important to find a testing option that you feel is safe. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that many, many high schools in South Florida are giving what's called the school day SAT and the school day ACT. It's a test that's given during the week. There are dates already set up in October, and that you can find out if your school is giving it. It is only for students at your school. It is given on a school day. So that may be the perfect opportunity to feel safer taking an SAT or an ACT. Another question.
So the question's been asked is, what range is competitive score for a top university? So can you, before you answer, can you define, I guess, one, what a top university means, and two, the types of ranges you might see in the different tiers?
Okay. So the first thing is, the question was, what's a top university? Let me redefine that. What's a selective or highly selective university? And I think every person will have a different idea, but I think one of the factors that you can, let's say, more easily base it on is the percentage of students who are admitted. I would say our nation's most highly selective universities are single-digit universities. So in other words, a university that admits fewer than 10% of its applicants. It could be an Ivy at Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, but guess what? It could also be a school like Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt last year was a 9% admit rate. So I would say that those schools are considered the most highly selective, and actually ignore the ratings. But if you go to US News and World Report.com, I think it's just usnewsandworldreport.com, but you can Google it. US News and World Report just came out last week with its best colleges ratings for hundreds of universities. I honestly ignore the ratings. I don't care if something's number 7 or number 17 or 77. What I look at US News and World Report for is one easy source to see mid 50% for SAT and ACT and the percent admitted. And it's consistent. So it's all the colleges had to submit their information at roughly the same time. And yes, there are colleges that don't have data in there, but the most highly selective absolutely have all their data in there. And you'll also see for these colleges where the admit rate might be something like 9%. I actually looked it up for someone today, that their averages went from something like 14, let's say 30, 1440, up to about 1550 or 1560. So and that's the mid 50%. And so what that's really telling you is that 25% of those kids who got in had better than a 1560. So 75% of the kids, because we take the mid 50% and we add the top 25%, 75% of those kids had above, let's say, a 1440, 1450 SAT. So the most selective colleges probably admit fewer than 10%. And the very highly selective universities may admit fewer than 20 or 25%. That might be a school like, say, Emory or Tulane. Maybe I think WashU might be in the same ballpark, almost as as Vanderbilt, somewhere in between Vanderbilt probably and Emory. But anyway, you're looking at scores 1400s, 1500s for the nation's most selective colleges, anywhere from the 20% admit rate on down. So if you have strong scores, it's definitely a plus face in the face of college admission, of college admissions today. I wanted to give you from the US News and World Report. Notice I threw away all the rankings. I just wanted to give you an idea of test scores. These are the mid 50% for a number of, very selective universities. And again, this is all information you can get from the Current magazine, or you can get online from US News and World Report, just came out last week. And these are the newest numbers for the state universities in Florida in terms of the mid 50%. The GPA is that recalculated GPA. So it's the core weighted GPA. And then you've got your SAT and ACT scores. And one of the best things about Florida, besides our fabulous weather, is the fact that we have an incredible range of colleges, some that are highly selective and some that are far less selective. So almost a university for everyone. So just looking a little bit further in terms of an effective testing calendar for SAT, ACT. Another question.
My junior son would normally be taking the SAT and ACT for the first time this fall, but due to COVID, it's uncomfortable to sit for an in-person exam. What would you advise?
Okay, so the question is, my junior son would be taking SAT or ACT for the first time this fall, feels uncomfortable taking it. What would I advise? So typically I don't advise taking an SAT at all until you get back your PSAT scores, and most high schools are still planning on giving the PSAT in October. But I honestly push my juniors to consider taking the SAT let me just fast forward a moment here we go. Testing calendar for juniors is, I don't believe in taking it before March of junior year, because by then you already have your PSAT scores back. You've learned from your mistakes. You can do much better on an SAT. And if you have taken an ACT earlier, you also know whether SAT or ACT is your better test. However, if you don't feel comfortable, in all honesty, wait. Believe it or not, you can test all the way through almost the end, well, at least halfway through your senior year. Let me back up a minute and go back to sophomores and what sophomores can do. PSAT is going to be given in October. Hold off on taking an SAT. I would consider taking the ACT at the very end of the year, most likely in June. And it's starred specifically because if you take an SAT in June, and same thing is true in April, you can pay a little bit extra, get the test information released, and get back a copy of your test, your answers, and the right answers in order to determine why you made mistakes and learn from them. But the other really, really cool thing about ACT, which I would say most students don't know, is that it is a risk-free test. ACT allows you to cancel your score after you've gotten it at any time before you're applying to college. And I wouldn't cancel it right away. I would wait and see what future scores were. But you can actually erase a score from your official ACT record so that it's impossible to ever send it to a college. And if you go to a public school in Palm Beach County, for example, where we still put SAT and ACT scores on the transcript, and I don't know why, you need to make arrangements to get any officially removed score also removed from your transcript, which can either be done through the school board or can be done through the Board of Education office or through your counselor. If you live in Broward County, your public schools no longer put scores on your transcript, and most private schools don't put scores on the transcript. So ACT is risk-free. Hopefully by June of 2021, we will have had a vaccine. It will be a lot safer, and sophomores can consider taking an ACT at the very end of the year, and they can even consider taking an SAT in August, right before school begins, if they have the entire summer to prepare for the SAT. Otherwise, you hold off on taking that SAT. For the juniors, the PSAT is given also in October, and I would have my juniors not take SAT until second semester, and only if they feel that they can do better on that than they can on ACT, or they know they've done so well on PSAT that they're going to continue on with SAT. March is my favorite time to take it. The May test, and by the way, the STAR tests are tests that you can also get back when you register for the question and answer service, and pay a little bit extra to get back, the questions, your answers, and the correct answers. The May SAT is given usually just before AP exams begin. So a lot of kids don't like to take that May test unless they start preparing for it well in advance. But you also have the June test as well. There is a possibility that a January test will be reinstated in 2021 if there is enough a January SAT, that is, if there is enough demand for it. But understand that you still are going to have plenty more opportunities to take a test. In terms of the ACT for juniors, my favorite time, if you're currently a junior, if you can register and feel safe with it, I would absolutely register for the December ACT. It is the first time during this testing year that you can get back a copy of your test and learn from your mistakes. You'll get back your score for it around the same time you'll get back your score for your PSAT. And although PSAT is an easier test, you can still compare your testing experiences of October PSAT for juniors as well as December ACT. And from that, you can decide that one test or the other is likely to be better for you. And so that all of your future testing could be either prepping for just SAT or prepping for just ACT. And I've got here all the dates that the ACT right now is scheduled for second semester, and I've starred the ones where you can get back a copy of the test and learn from your mistakes. Moving on, if you're a senior, you have August, October, November, December, and let's face it, a year from now, we should all be safe, and you can see that you have plenty of opportunities to take an SAT early in the year. And even if you're applying for early action or early decision, Almost every college will wait for the November scores, even though the November test is after the November 1st deadline. Most colleges will still wait for the November scores. You have to ask just to be sure. But look at all those opportunities you have first semester of your senior year to take an SAT. And if you wanted to take an ACT for senior year, you've got July, September, October, December, and again, who knows if there'll be any extra tests added next year, but you can also see that you've got plenty of opportunities. So if your junior student does not feel comfortable going into school, taking a test, don't worry. Honestly, you really still do have plenty of time. Question?
How many days does it take to get your score results back?
Okay, the question is, how long does it take to get your score results back? It depends on the time of year, but for most of the SATs and ACTs, it's roughly 2 weeks.
And would you recommend students take the test earlier than March of junior year if they've already had their math?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Let's go back to the junior year. Would I recommend that a student take an SAT earlier than March if he or she has already had all the math? And the only math that's tested is Algebra 1, Algebra 2, a tiny little bit of geometry, and a tiny little bit of trigonometry. So it's 2/3 of the test is actually algebra. So most kids really have already finished all of that, by the junior year. But anyway, I still would not recommend taking it earlier. I'm going to take that PSAT in October, which doesn't count for college admission, but is the first step to National Merit Scholarship. You cannot get a National Merit Scholarship unless your junior PSAT score is pretty high, typically in the top, 2% per state. Usually that means here in Florida, scoring somewhere in the low to mid 700s in both the reading, writing, and in the math. I would really want to get my PSAT score back and learn from my mistakes before I actually take my first SAT as a junior. However, if you really feel you're eager beaver, you really want to get that test done, perhaps, take that test in November or December. But frankly, this year, my advice to juniors is to please leave the seats for seniors who really need that test like now, because you guys, juniors still have plenty of time to take that test. Also, bear in mind that quite a few colleges, forget test optional. Let's assume we're going back to pre-COVID times. And juniors, when you apply to college, most of your colleges will likely not be test optional. Some of those colleges will tell you to please send all of your SAT or all of your ACT scores. And they tell you that they super score. So it means they're going to count your best reading, writing, and your best math, even if they came from 2 different administrations. They claim that the lower scores do not impact their admission decisions. I cannot say that I 100% believe that. Perhaps at a very large state university, like even our state universities in Florida, I do believe that, because I don't believe they have the time to look at all of that. But I do think that anything a college sees can be used either in your favor or perhaps not as much in your favor. And therefore, if I have to send all of my scores, and not just the ones that I'm super scoring, not just say my top 2 administrations, but if I've taken the SAT, let's say 4 times, and a college is asking for all of my scores, I really do have to send all of them. With ACT, by the way, the score report itself can only contain 1 score. And so many colleges that would ask for all of your ACT scores actually may allow you to self-report all but what you consider to be your best, set of ACT scores, and that they will super score. So honestly, I would avoid taking, to me, taking an SAT 4 times is too many, but there is no rule. You can take it as many times as you really want. Just don't take it enough times for it to be considered an extracurricular activity. And just giving you an idea of sort of the last time that you can take tests, depending upon, whether you're applying for, early decision or early action, or even Florida's Bright Futures. And, traditionally Bright Futures deadline is that you must take the SAT or ACT by June. Do you know that for the class that just graduated and that's currently enrolled in college, they actually, because many of them did not have an opportunity to take an SAT or an ACT again to try to raise their score, those kids actually have until December of this year to take another SAT or ACT to be able to get Bright Futures. So I guess it's retroactive. They haven't said, Board of Governors hasn't said yet what they're doing for the current senior year class, if the testing date for Bright Futures might be extended beyond June. So one of the handouts that you can download from tonight's session is a list of all those colleges, and it's a very small list, that actually require or recommend the SAT or ACT optional essay. And trust me, that is one of the very few times you will ever hear the word optional used with college admissions. That truly means optional. There's very few colleges that require or recommend that SAT or ACT essay. And similarly, there have been in the past a number of colleges that required or recommended what are called SAT subject tests. They're often were required more for engineering majors, for STEM majors, for the BSMD majors, and for highly selective universities. But since so many colleges have gone test optional, that very few of them are paying any attention whatsoever to SAT and to SAT subject tests. But there is a download that you can do of a handout that gives you the list so far, that we know for this year of who is either requiring or recommending SAT subject tests. I will tell you that list was put together before the ruling came down for the University of California system, which is test blind. And by the way, if you have some really good SAT subject test scores and you're applying to a college that has never, let's say, required or recommended them, but you have some really good scores, send them. They cannot hurt you in any way if they are really good scores. And just to sort of finish up this little bit about test scores before I move on to what else colleges look at, I do want to give you a word of advice about test prep and how to pick a good test prep provider. You should always be asking what materials they use, and they need to make exclusive use of real tests. Both College Board and ACT have quite a few now real tests in publication, downloadable from their websites, or that test prep companies that have been in operation for quite a while have access to previous ones since the last changes were made to those tests. And you also want to ask how they teach strategy, and to make sure that whatever your test prep provider is doing in terms of teaching strategy, that they do have their own proprietary strategy guide, that when they're teaching a student how to, like, backdoor approaches to do certain kinds of math problems, that all of that is in writing for a student's reference. So the student does not have to remember strategies just by pure memory or take notes during a tutoring session. A good test prep provider will also give simulations that typically on a Saturday morning, you can either virtually or go in and actually take a full-length timed and proctored test. And you really just want to be sure that your child has a great relationship with that test prep provider, that they really look forward to it. Honestly, test prep really can be fun. I know that when I did test prep, and I did for many years because that's my background, I worked for Evil Testing Serpent, the ETS, the company that created the SAT for College Board. I always made it fun so that I would have a good time and look forward to all of my tutoring sessions. And I think that's really important because, let's face it, most kids really don't want to spend the time prepping. And I certainly hope that you'll, give some serious consideration perhaps to prepping with us. Some of our test prep tutors are working face-to-face, but many of them are working virtually, and even our small group sessions are also virtual. So I really do hope that you'll think about doing some work with us. And I'd like to answer a couple questions that have come in.
Can SAT subject tests be retaken for higher scores, or is that something that's not looked good upon?
So the question is, can SAT subject tests be taken for higher scores? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, one of my students just sent me his SAT subject test scores from September. He had taken the math level 2 back in, let me say at a much earlier age. And at that point, he scored a 700, which, by the way, is not a good score on math level 2 because it put him in something like the 60th percentile, or maybe it was even lower. But he just got his new score back, got an 800. He will be sending just his most recent scores to colleges. So absolutely, you can retake an SAT subject test and raise your score and send the higher score to colleges. Unless a college has a rule that says even subject tests you need to send all, but I'm not sure I'm even aware of any college that has that rule today. We do have a couple of webinars coming up about testing. In fact, there are 2 PSAT prep webinars. They are completely free. One of them going over reading, writing, one of them doing the math. We'll be doing them next month. After the scores come back in December, there are 2 actual webinars that will be about, PSAT. And so these are all free, and I would certainly, advise you to think about signing up for them. We'll be actually formally announcing them relatively soon. So moving on beyond the data, because the data, the numbers who you are, your scores and your academic record. But let's face it, you are much more than just a number. You're a person. You're a human being. You're going to interact on campus. So what are the things that the colleges are putting weight on, that they've always put weight on, but understand much, much more weight now without having a test score? So it's really your extracurricular commitment. And commitment is really the key word here, or engagement. Colleges are not, especially selective colleges, they are not looking for kids who are members of, say, 5 or 6 clubs and do very little. What they want are students that have just a few activities, and whether they are school, personal, summer, church or synagogue, babysitting, caring for a sick relative, caring for younger siblings after school. They are looking for consistent engagement. They want long-term. They don't want that you've done an activity for, 1 year and then done a different activity another year. They don't want the kid who's well-rounded and say, well, I played soccer as a freshman. I was on the swim team as a sophomore. I joined the baseball team as a junior. What's best, of course, are students who start their own activities, that have their own special projects, because the more selective colleges really want the movers and the shakers, the kids who are born leaders, who don't just take over a leadership role, let's say being president of student government, but who have started perhaps their own community service project. Basically, they want kids who are standing out. And I would say that for the nation's most selective universities, those that might have the very low 1-digit acceptance rates, they're looking for kids who have national titles, students who are, maybe the, national debate champion in Congress, or the students who have won many Mu Alpha Theta competitions on the national level, or perhaps a student who has been published, or a student who has done independent research, or perhaps who already has a patent, or a student who wrote a play where the play was perhaps performed off Broadway. So I would say that the more selective the university, let's say the higher the GPA that your resume needs to have, if you could give a GPA to your resume. And basically what colleges are looking for, a third of them on Common App, including some of the nation's most selective universities, actually give students an opportunity to upload a detailed activity resume. It's typically no more than 1 or 2 pages. Yes, you can go 2 pages on an activity resume for college, but they really want for students to showcase what they've accomplished, how they've done it, why they've done it, what was their impact on other people. So what I'd like to do is show you, for instance, what a good activity resume can look like. These are not, 2 of them, a couple of them are not from formats that you're going to find on the internet. They're basically things that I worked on individually with students. But basically, I want to show you what a really good resume looks like, but understand that having your high school student at any grade start to create a resume, or for you as mom and dad create, being executive assistant, keeping track of things. Once you get into the habit of creating a resume, It really teaches you how to give the elevator speech, how in 1 minute, to tell someone, who you are. It certainly allows you to interview better. And yes, there are still going to be alumni interviews this year for the nation's most selective universities. We anticipate that they will all be done by Zoom or Skype or something similar. But it's great to be able to have a resume to share with whoever is going to interview you. And truly, once a high school student gets going creating a resume, it's that same resume that will be kept up throughout college, perhaps changed in format. And as a student gets more involved in activities or work or internship or research in college, perhaps dropping off the less important things from high school to add on the new things from college, because that way you're always in a position to have a resume available, whether it's for an honor society or a job or an internship. You're just always ready, and you've learned how to effectively market yourself. And honestly, getting into a top tier university, or really any university, is how well do you market yourself. So the resumes that I'm showing you now are, first of all, the resumes that I have permission to show from previous students, and the names have also been changed. But this gives you an idea of how you can create a resume, where on the right side are the nitty-gritty details, in this case, for the student's science and community outreach. But on the left-hand side are like the name of the activity, when the student did it, and a picture as well, because the student liked graphics. And this is a student who did wind up at Harvard. So yes, you can have a resume that looks like this, and organizing a resume by category and making up your own categories is perfect. I'm not going to use a category of school clubs and then other extracurricular and then community service. That's really too boring. I'm going to look for more specific. So in this case, this is a student who was pre-med. And so for a pre-med student, anything science related and outreach related is incredibly important, and colleges do look at your extracurricular, not only in the general context, but in the context of what is your intended major, because applications do ask you for an intended major. Although you can say undecided, you don't necessarily look as strong if you have a specific major. And yes, you can change your major. Certain changes are much easier than others. This is a resume from a student who also graduated from another Ivy League college, but you can see that he was very big in debate in 3 different categories. And so we listed, his top accolades in debate. And you can see that, a college would look at this and say, this is a really intellectual kid. And the fact that he was team captain, respect of his, his team members, a good leader, a good collaborator. And it's better than just saying that, I was on the debate team. And he did something a little unusual. He actually had a very, very short paragraph in there about, the importance of debate to him. This is one that a student actually totally reformatted on her own. There is a website called Canva. And so she took a resume that we worked on together, and she reformatted it using one of the formats in Canva, made it the colors of the school that she was applying to, even has her picture in there, and added some graphics to it. So understand that extracurricular commitment is really a biggie, and you'll be definitely rated on it, from colleges. And again, starting your own activity, taking a leadership role, having long-term commitment. And I'm not going to tell you that, theater is better than journalism, which is better than athletics, which is better than debate. Colleges need some of everything. So it's whatever activity serves your passion the most is something you want to show that you have significant involvement and achievement in. Next down will be the well-written essays. That there are every selective college requires a personal statement, and yes, you can use the same one for each. It's an essay that reveals something very special about you. In fact, I have a separate webinar that you can go to my website and find. I did it about maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago on how to write an effective essay, and I even read aloud a half a dozen essays so that you'd have examples of what a really great personal statement is. It is probably the hardest part of the application for any student because writing about yourself is probably the most difficult thing in the world. And it's also not the kind of writing that your kids have done while they've been in high school. This is not your 5-paragraph essay that starts with a thesis statement and ends with a summary. It is creative writing. It is conversational. It is opening yourself up so that the admission readers basically really find out what makes you tick, who you are, as a person, what's important to you, what are your values. It's not a regurgitation, of your resume or your life. It's about, sort of one small moment in time and how that impacted who you are. But there are many more essays than just that personal statement. For example, if you're applying to Wake Forest or Stanford, you have 8 or 9 essays. They're shorter. Shorter doesn't mean easier. If you are applying to the University of Michigan, there is, let's see, the why Michigan and why your particular major at Michigan, and also for you to write about the community that you come from. And the clever student in writing about the community that he comes from isn't necessarily going to be writing about the Palm Beach Gardens community or, the Dreyfus School of the Arts. Well, might write about the Dreyfus School of the Arts community, but might instead be writing more about his community of artists and what they share in common, or the community of wrestlers. It's we need to think creatively. So many, highly selective universities are going to have 2, 3, 4 or more additional essays, and they matter a lot. Colleges will also be looking for really strong, what I'll call anecdotal recommendations. It's basically a recommendation that tells a story of your child. So if my math teacher wrote, I highly recommend Judi for your university as a math major. She is the best student I've ever had. I waited 35 years in my career to have a student just like Judi. I hope you admit her. That recommendation is going to go in the garbage, as strong as you may think it is. It will be much better if it's anecdotal and it says, Judi's approach to solving Fermat's last theorem was quite imaginative. And then it maybe went into how Judi organized study groups for some of the less able students in the class, or how Judi was the first one to present an alternate solution to a problem that I posted on the board. And basically the way you get a really great recommendation like that is after asking your teacher, telling your teacher that you'd like to send her an email with some bullet points of what was so special in her class for you. Perhaps it was a project that you worked on, a paper that you wrote. Perhaps it was having, coming in several mornings a week in order to discuss your interpretation of The Merchant of Venice. But you're actually providing that teacher with some information because she may not have remembered all of that. And similarly, you as parents can actually send the guidance counselor or the college counselor who will be writing a recommendation for your son or daughter, some things that he or she may not know about your child that you think are really important, that will show off, her character, her values, her morals, some special things that the guidance counselor might not know about her. And especially if you have a public high school guidance counselor, that they have enormous, work, caseloads, and that the amount of time they might have for each individual student is limited, not out of choice, but because, they have to in order to get all of their work done. So they might be incredibly grateful to get information from you like that. What you're really saying is, like, hey, you, please put this into, Judi's recommendation, but you're saying it in a very, comfortable way. Okay, what else? Demonstrated interest in the university. And I'm going to say that has changed because of COVID-19. It used to be, and for those of you who have sophomores, juniors, even younger students, it will go back to the old way, where your demonstrated interest was best shown by a campus visit, an information session on campus, by staying in touch with your admissions rep. And when I say admissions rep, understand that most colleges read applications by region, and so there will be a Florida admissions rep, maybe even a Palm Beach County admissions rep, and that admissions rep will know the difference between, let's say, Dreyfus, Dwyer, Spanish River, Benjamin, and St. Andrews, just to name a few. And colleges, many colleges keep track of demonstrated interest. So, for example, one of the things that we're talking about now, especially in the face of COVID-19, where everything is virtual, is that not only do you sign up for the virtual campus tour and the virtual information session, but you sign up for the mailing list. And when you get email from a college, not only do you open it and read it, but you click on at least one of the links, because colleges use Google Analytics to keep track of demonstrated interest. And they're going to know if you opened an email, if you really read it based on how long it was open, what areas interested you the most based on what you've clicked on. So there is definitely still a way to demonstrate your interest in the face of COVID-19. You can call, you can find out who your admissions rep is. You can call to ask a good question. And by good, I mean it's a question that you couldn't easily answer, on their website. For example, when you evaluate my high school transcript, can you tell me if you consider AP and ACE courses exactly the same? And if they say to you, what's ACE? Well, then you know. But you can demonstrate your interest virtually. There are just plenty of opportunities to connect with a college this way. And the reason demonstrated interest is important to many colleges is because they are very concerned with something called yield. That is the percentage of accepted students who say yes back to the college. It's a popularity contest. A college wants as high a yield as possible. The research that they have done has shown that kids who demonstrate interest are much more likely to say yes to them than others. So that colleges will, to some extent, not quite go out of their way, but if you've demonstrated your interest and you're sort of borderline, or they're comparing you to other candidates from your high school or your region, you are more likely to be the one who is admitted. And there's a high percentage of colleges that have said that demonstrated interest is of considerable importance. It's typically more important at the private level than the public level, because many public institutions just don't have the time to track demonstrated interest. Okay, next, intellectual curiosity. And this is true for the highly selective, the uber selective schools. How do you show your intellectual curiosity? Well, first of all, it will be in your academic record because you challenged yourself with tough courses. It may be in how you spent your summers, because you may have either spent your summers taking college courses or engaged in some intellectual pursuit. You may have extracurricular activities that show your intellectual curiosity. Perhaps it's debate or mu alpha theta, or perhaps it's in a recommendation where what your teacher has written about you shows that you're not just a grade grubber, that you're not just there to learn and get through it, but that you deeply care. And so the more selective the university is, the more they are looking for intellectual curiosity. And I just read that I know that Emory University, among others, absolutely rates students on their intellectual curiosity. So it could be your curiosity about, almost anything. Okay. Getting close to the end of the list. So, your demographics and sort of who you are as a person. Colleges, first of all, are looking for really good kids, kind kids, caring, compassionate. They'll know that because of the kind of community service that you've done. They'll know that because of your teacher recommendations. And in terms of demographics, Colleges today love first-generation students because they feel that they have overcome obstacles. They had parents who did not graduate from college or did not go to college, and therefore they may not have necessarily had all the advantages of a student whose parents are both college graduates. For some colleges, if you live much, much further away, it may be slightly easier to get in because they want that demographic diversity. They care to a large extent how big your family is, what your zip code is. Many colleges love to brag about the number of students who they've accepted who are on Pell Grants, which are given to the most socioeconomically deprived students who are in college. So where you come from, who your family is, what your values are is more and more important to college because they are definitely looking for, kids who will make up a really, I'm going to say a high energy and well-behaved community on their campus. And finally, number 10 in this list is your ability to pay. I would say for the very, very uber selective universities, this may not matter as much, although they've all lost a tremendous amount of money because of COVID-19. The wealthier universities may be a little bit more, maybe need blind. Most colleges are need aware in the sense that if you can pay, your chances of getting in are better, and especially if you've been put on a waiting list, your chances of getting off a waiting list are better if you are full pay. But I don't want you to go into ridiculous amounts of debt to say that you are full pay and find other ways, to pay. It's not worth it. But just know that if you're in the position where you are full pay, it may make it slightly easier, but only slightly easier to get in. But I'd now like to get to sort of this number 11, which actually just came out in a wonderful brand new book. That I'm now in the middle of reading, actually. It's by Jeffrey Salingo. It's about college admissions, really who gets in and why. And he made public information that I would say just some of us in the college admissions business knew about, which has to do with the very last steps in regular decision, perhaps 2 weeks before acceptances are mailed. And it's a step called shaping the class. It is something that all selective colleges do. Think about this. If you were having a wedding, and after you made your entire invitation list and you're starting to do your, figuring out your seating arrangements and who can or can't sit with whom and who may come and who may not come, and who you might have left out and who you might not really need, you're going to start making changes before you send out those invitations. Before you send it to the calligrapher to address all the invitations, you're going to feel that there may be some people that you're going to now drop and other people that you might add. But you're going to play around with those, invitations for the last few days before you actually officially send them out. Well, that's what colleges do too. They now, instead of looking, and they've looked individually at all the kids, they've made comparisons, they've scored them, they've picked out the ones that they want to admit, deny, and waitlist. But now they're going to look at the entire admitted class, and they're going to do some highly sophisticated quantitative analysis to figure out which of these kids is more likely to come, how many of them are going to come, how much money they can, all afford. And they may find out that, well, wait a minute, we admitted 100 kids more, or we're going to get 100 kids more than we really anticipate. We don't have room for them. That means that, and because we normally have, let's say, a 50% yield, that means that we have to cut out 200 kids. And we're probably going to cut them out regionally. And because we're a university that's located here in the Southeast, we're going to start with the Southeast, and we're going to say, we're going to have a committee of admission counselors who are going to eliminate 100 accepted kids who were from the Southeast. And so that committee is going to get together, and they only have a couple, maybe 2 or 3 days at most, to review every kid who came in who was accepted from the Southeast, and spend a few minutes on each one and decide which ones they're going to eliminate. And this is a kid who was accepted initially, but they can't have that many kids from the Southeast. And so they're going to start, let's say, with the most selective majors. And they're going to say for their university, they know that the natural sciences are the most selective. And remember, I told you before that kids are rated on things. In fact, the academic rating this was actually, he observed Emory University, and this is what happened at Emory. Every student has an academic rating, and the academic rating is a combination, is some index number, I believe it's 1 to 5, that is based upon the evaluation of your academic record and your test scores combined. And so they took the kids who were rated 1 to 5, they put them from the Southeast, who were applying for natural sciences, and they put them in order of the lowest academic rating to the highest. And they started throwing away kids, literally, who are the lowest academic ratings. And they may have decided we need to throw away 15 natural science kids who have the lowest academic rating. But they did look at other things. So, for example, if that student was also, let's say, had a special tag of underrepresented minority or legacy, because mom or dad had gone there, they might have decided, let's not eliminate him. They would also have compared these kids to the other kids in their high school who applied, and to see how they compared to the other kids who got in. And they basically might throw the student away, or they might keep him, depending upon how the other students fared. And they're going to go through a few of the majors that way, but they're also going to be looking at, other factors, like, do we have enough linguistics majors? You know what? We need to add a couple of linguistics majors, because we've also been told that we have too many physics majors. So essentially, they are going to reshape the class. They're going to take some of the kids who've been accepted, and they're going to be either rejected or waitlisted. They actually wind up doing, at Emory at least, 2 rounds of these, because they do an extra round on the kids who have special tags associated with them. But when you get your letter of acceptance, you really don't know if you might have almost for a moment been considered to be rejected, or if you do get rejected from the university, you will never know if you were on their accepted list. You were on that wedding invitation list until the very last moment, and that you were the last person who was cut. So I can promise you that this is something that is happening at selective universities. And basically what Jeff Salingo, and Jeff is a journalist, writes for many popular newspapers. He's also a best-selling author. And he talks about that the final shaping of this incoming class, the academic standards actually have to give way to other more ambiguous factors. So just remember, do we need a particular major? Do we need more kids from an area? Do we need more tuba players? And I would like to talk just a bit about timing, because the early bird absolutely gets the worm. I know that's a cliche. I hate to use cliches, but this graph shows you 7 of the 8 Ivies. Cornell did not give all the data, so we couldn't use it. But the tallest line, the turquoise line, shows the percentage of kids who applied and early through either an early decision or what's now called either a restricted early action plan or a single choice early action plan. But for instance, let me take a look at Dartmouth, because Dartmouth has the highest numbers. A little bit more than a quarter of the kids who applied early decision, which is binding, to Dartmouth got in. But if I look at the kids who accepted regular, and that's yellow, in other words, these are the kids who did not apply early decision, who applied for the later deadline, barely 7% of them got in. So we're basically saying that almost 4 times as many kids got in who were willing to make the binding commitment to Dartmouth. And you can see that all 7 of these schools have very similar profiles, that the students who applied earlier definitely had improved chances. The other thing to bear in mind is that there's early decision, which is binding. If you get in, you must go. And then there is early action or restricted early action, that if you get in, you don't have to go, but there are some restrictions in terms of where else you can apply early. And each of these colleges that had early, although Princeton dropped the restricted early action because of COVID-19, they all have marginally different policies if they are either REA, restricted early action, or they are single choice early action. It's definitely worth considering, not just the IBs, but what the IBs do, other colleges follow suit. So for the overwhelming majority of colleges that offer an early plan, it's definitely easier to get in earlier. Colleges claim it's because we have a stronger applicant pool. That is part of the reason. But the other interesting thing is that the applicant pool for early is much smaller, because only kids who, for instance, families who take advantage of, say, webinars like this, who come from well-resourced schools where their college counselors can provide information where they can start their college searches early. So it is a much smaller applicant pool, but you need to understand how much of the class gets filled early. So this is now all 8 of the IVs, and you can see that roughly 50% of their classes are filled early. And the regular pool is a substantially larger applicant pool. So if you can apply to an early decision, if the school steals your heart and you really, really, really want to go there, applying early decision can make a lot of sense. Applying early action honestly always makes sense because you're not bound to it. There are some schools that tell you if finances are going to be an issue for you. Some schools will say don't apply early decision because we can't promise any money. Other schools may say it's fine to apply early decision even if you know that you need financial aid, because we will, we tend to either meet full need or we can let you out for financial reasons. Are there some other questions that have come up?
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions.
Oh, a bunch of questions. Okay, good. We're almost done.
I'm just going to take them from the bottom. Do kids that stay close to home have any advantage in getting accepted since residential accommodations aren't necessary?
Because what's not necessary?
Residential
Okay.
accommodations.
So the question is, if you want to go to college closer to home and you're going to live at home, not on campus, does it make it easier to get in because you don't need residential accommodations? The answer is no. It doesn't necessarily make it easier. Colleges love kids who live there because much of their income is based on the money they get from room and board. I mean, remember, colleges are businesses. They may be nonprofits, but they're businesses.
Do you have a better chance of admission if you select summer term versus fall?
Okay, so do you have a better chance of admission if you select summer term versus fall? So there are very few places that actually allow you to do that. I think it's 10 of our 12 state universities have both summer and fall admission, and it is generally easier to get in the summer than it is in the fall. I'd say for UF, there's very, very little difference between summer and fall. There's just a few other colleges around that allow summer and fall. Almost every college you're applying for fall.
Will colleges take into account if both parents have bachelor's degrees from outside the U.S., the student is raised by a single parent, and the parent is absolutely new to the U.S. education system?
Okay, so do colleges take into consideration that a student is coming, first of all, let's introduce them individually, coming from a single family household? I don't know that impacts an admission decision as much as it might impact a financial aid decision, but I'm not an expert in financial aid. Does it matter, does it take into consideration that your parents, whether it's one or that you have one parent or you have two parents, but that they were educated outside of the U.S., that they are, they grew up outside, they're new to the U.S., would that impact an admission decision? It might play, ever the smallest role, but they would have assumed that perhaps your parents would have been talking to their next door neighbors and found out about, oh, your child needs to take the SAT, or, why don't you look at XYZ college? So it might have a small a tiny, tiny little bearing. I don't know that it would have much more than that.
For full resumes, not just the activity resumes, how long should they be?
Okay. So the question was about a full resume, not just an activity resume. When you're applying to college, the only resume you really have is an activity resume. You don't need to put on an activity resume, for example, where you go to high school, what your GPA is, what your test scores are, what APs you've taken, because the rest of your application will have all of that information. However, if I'm doing a magnet program, for instance, if I'm at, let's say, Suncoast doing the MSE program, or perhaps I'm a performing arts major at Dreyfus, I would have that probably on the top of my resume in the header near my name, address, phone number, and email. But there is no, general resume that you would send to college. It's strictly an activity resume. It would also have your honors by activity as well as academic honors. 1 or 2 pages is all I like to see. All colleges want to see.
Both of my sons are Eagle Scouts. One is now at FSU, and my high school junior is hoping to go to FSU. Will colleges take that into consideration, and to what level of importance?
Okay, so great question. I have 2 sons, both Eagle Scouts. One's at FSU. The other one would like to be at FSU. So basically, he's legacy at FSU because his older brother is there. So if his older brother is really doing well, it's definitely going to help because it will, you'll be able to put that on the application that my older brother, is at FSU. It's part of Common App. Let's see. And Eagle Scout colleges love Eagle Scouts. They love Girl Scouts. So it's very important to highlight with Eagle Scouts, like what was your Eagle project? What are the badges that you've gotten all along? What leadership roles do you have? How long have you been involved in scouting? Why are you involved in scouting? That is a fabulous extracurricular activity. Eagle Scout, Girl Scouts, fabulous.
What is a really good subject test score?
What is a really good subject test score? So it definitely varies by subject. But I'm going to say a really good one has to be in the 700s. I honestly would not send a subject test score that's lower than 700 any place. But for example, I know math because I'm a math nerd. My background is mathematics and computer science. A 700 on the SAT math level 2, which is really the only one to take. Colleges really don't care about math level 1. It's too much like a regular SAT or ACT. That 700 is roughly the 60th percentile, something like that. I think it's probably very similar in some of the AP sciences. If you have the College Board's book of subject tests, you can look at the score, the score calculation table, because it will show you, like, for instance, how low down does a 700 go. The other thing is that you can just Google, and it is readily available information. If you Google SAT subject test percentiles, you're going to find it. 700s are better, I would always send.
Is UCF now?
But not math level 2. I really want a 750 in math level 2.
Is UCF now considered a more selective Florida school than USF?
Okay. Oh, that's a good question. Is UCF more selective than USF? I would say it really depends. This is edging it. I'd say it really depends upon the major. If you look at that SUS table that you can download, it was also much earlier in the presentation. It shows the mid 50% GPA and SAT. And by the way, that doesn't guarantee admission. If you're in those ranges, it basically says you have a very high likelihood of getting in, and the higher you are, the better. But your essays and your extracurricular are really going to play a role. Recommendations almost don't matter at all in virtually all of our state universities. And they don't necessarily offer exactly the same majors either. So I'm going to say it's, it depends upon the major, but they are pretty similar, and probably both are the next most selective, after UF and FSU. Okay, we have a few webinars that you may want to look at, on our website. There is one specifically that I just did last week on nitty-gritty detail on what it takes to get into each of our state universities and what's very special about all 12 of them, actually. And when COVID started, we started doing all kinds of webinar series with one of them was meeting with Florida's admission counselors. That doesn't mean colleges in Florida. It means colleges that have admission counselors who live here in Florida. And there are, I don't know, 20 of them who did webinars with us. We also did presentations with, George Washington and American University, FSU and UF, Southern Methodist University and Texas Christian University. So if you'd like some opportunities to meet the colleges, we did some wonderful webinars over the past several months with I don't know, 50 or 60 different colleges. There's another webinar that explains SAT versus ACT, which may be the better test for you. And as I mentioned earlier, I very recently did one on college application essays and what makes for a great essay. We almost always have different kinds of promotions going. When people tune into our webinar, we want to let them know about this one, that if you'd like us to take your child's personal statement or any other essay, we'll be happy to do a very, very thorough review, both in writing and verbally, and get information back, generally speaking, within 24 to 48 hours of an essay, and that may be all your child needs to make an essay, really perfect. If there are any other questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Nothing yet.
Okay, then I really would like to thank you all for being with me this evening. If you, our Facebook page, Score at the Top, or our Twitter, which is College Council, we are always posting information about college admission. And honestly, if you just want to email me if you have a question, I'm Judi, Judi, at scoreatthetop.com. I want to wish you all well in the college planning and application process. It's never too soon to start doing it. And please stay well, stay safe, and only take the SAT or ACT if you feel that it will be safe. Your health is not worth it. So have a great evening, everyone. And oh, wait, there is another question. One last minute question.
I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but how about homeschooling this year? My child's in all APs and honors.
Okay, so the question I have to do with homeschooling and AP, and honors. Most colleges have slightly separate rules for homeschooled kids, because in many cases, the parents are overseeing it all. So, if your child is homeschooling and doing courses that are, let's say, AP, it's going to be very important for them to take an AP exam at the end of the year. And you could call really almost any school. It's probably a little easier to go with a private school to find out whether that school could order the AP exams for your child, or if you're homeschooling through an organization, that organization should be able to get the AP exams and a place for your child to take the AP. Many colleges want to see a description of the course and perhaps the materials used, the textbooks and ancillary materials. Perhaps even keep a small portfolio that would showcase your child's, best work in some of the more rigorous courses, so that a college will have, an idea about, what those academics truly reflect, because they have no one to compare it to. And definitely SAT and ACT are going to play an even stronger role for a homeschool student, as will SAT subject tests, because they will verify that, the A was an A was an A, or the B. So I hope that answered the question. If not, just get in touch with us. So, thanks for listening tonight. If you have any college application, admissions, planning needs, please call us, because what we do is work with kids privately. So thanks again for tuning in tonight. Stay well, everyone.